Hello and welcome to this podcast for Electropages. I'm your host, Robin Mitchell. In today's episode, we, the Electropages team, have gone to Munich to interview some pretty cool people in the field of electronic engineering, including Toshiba. Now, before we jump into this podcast, I'm just going to mention one thing, which is that this doesn't look like Munich. And there's a reason for that. I had a scheduling conflict, unfortunately, and so I couldn't be in the country where we all love our beer and sausages. And so sadly, I had to go to the Philippines instead. So just before we jump into this podcast, I would like to introduce Armin Derpmanns, the Vice President of Marketing and Operations for Toshiba. And we're going to be talking about some really cool stuff to do with electronic engineering, the semiconductors, and the privatization of Toshiba. So thank you ever so much for being here today.
Yeah, good morning, Robin, or good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon here.
I think you've got a nice scenery in your background. I wish we would have the same nice scenery, but we have lovely people around us, which is great.
So just before we jump into the podcast, I'd like you to explain to the audience who you are, what you do, and what it is that you like to do in your free time.
My name is Armin Derpmanns, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Operations at our European headquarters in Düsseldorf in Germany. And marketing operation defines itself as having the business responsibility for semiconductors, as well as some additional responsibility for common operations in our headquarters in Düsseldorf. And
Fantastic.
You asked about my private activities. Yes,
oh, yes.
I'm very much into golf and also music. So I'm writing my own music, and this is helping me to stay creative, and by all means.
Ooh, you write your own music. What genre?
It's kind of rock music. So rock pop, something like
Honestly,
this. So
I would not have guessed that. I was thinking more like, I don't know, Bach or something with Baroque music. I was not thinking, oh, this dude's into rock. That's okay, that took me quite by surprise.
Yes, right.
Fantastic. That's great to see. That's great. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is the privatization of Toshiba. Now, what I want to ask is, what does that actually mean? Are we saying that before it was government owned, or was it publicly owned via shares and now it's all controlled by one entity? How is that structure working out?
Actually, Toshiba was a public listed company, so we had quite a couple of shareholders. And at the time, we had to take some more capital to go through some difficult times. We introduced more shareholders, but finally it turned out, while the company was trying to set up itself for the future, that discussion was a bit difficult to do with the shareholders we had. So in order to gain speed, in order to set a direction which I think is the best one for Toshiba as a technology company, the best option was for us to go private. And that's what we've gone through now. So the announcement was actually taken end of last year, and we were delisted also accordingly end of last year. Now we've embarked on a new road to renew ourselves, and that's a very exciting story for us.
And so that involved Toshiba having to purchase shares back so that they could essentially take the control back of the company?
Yes, right. So we've got some investor, and that is only one now, which has been helping us to buy the shares back from the market. And now we've, as I said, embarked on the process to renew ourselves with the support of that investor.
And I can imagine that, like you say, when you take on shareholders, it can help raise revenue for Toshiba to do new things. But the problem is, if those shareholders don't want to do new things, or they don't like the direction which you want to go with the ideas that you want to develop, they can be a hindrance. So I can appreciate that by making it private, it gives you the freedom to essentially do whatever it is you want to do. So if you wanted to, let's say, work with silicon carbide, you could go work with it. You don't have to have a shareholders meeting to say, are we going to enter this technology? So I suppose that helps to make Toshiba extremely competitive as well, in terms of like the speed at which you can make changes to the business.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, the thing that the new CEO of Toshiba has put in place is to focus on 4 main business areas. And to name, as I'm working for the semiconductor part, it's the electronic device and storage part of the company. and that's where the semiconductors are, and there's a specific focus on power semiconductors. But to understand the structure of Toshiba, we should also say that there is energy systems and solution, there's infrastructure systems and solution, and there's this what you call the digital solutions part. And that is now embracing the future of Toshiba, where the element of digitalization and focusing on topics like renewable energies, as well as forming appropriate infrastructures and their solutions towards like device technologies, is creating a very interesting and exciting link within our company between those individual parts of the company.
And so now that Toshiba's been made privatized, what's the first thing that you think that Toshiba is looking to invest in and sort of change direction towards?
Actually, we've already taken decision in advance because I can mostly talk about semiconductors, of course. And the main thing is making sure that we can produce in a very competitive way. And that's the reason why we've invested into low voltage MOSFET 300mm lines, together with some funds from the Japanese government, because this is, as you know, due to the geopolitical reasons and so on, every country is trying to secure its grounds for the future. And the second part to make sure that we have access to sufficient production capacity was to collaborate with Rome for silicon carbide, so that we have also an investment in that area, and that we have access to a factory that can produce the volume that is needed in the market. And that was one of the fundamental things that were sitting in the background. So it's making sure you can produce things in the required volumes necessary for the future.
And that ability to look at opportunities in the field of silicon carbide and other power electronics, that was being restricted by shareholders.
It wasn't necessarily restricted by shareholders, but it's like they all had different ideas as to how to move on with the company. So it's like there were things like splitting up the company in different parts and so on. So you have to seek what makes most sense for the company, and they were actually in the end trying to hold it all together, because we saw the synergies. We always talk about the one Toshiba. The one Toshiba in this sense means that you've got synergies between the different parts of our company that are important to scale ourselves in terms of creating the solutions that are necessary. For example, for topics like sustainability, circular economy, digitalization, and so on, where we all need to make some significant progress.
And so in terms of the consumer market, or what market is it that you're looking to go into with those power electronics and silicon carbide devices, etc.?
Well, very obviously, the main focus in our company is on automotive industry as well as industrial industry, because that is what I said when we talk about sustainability. It's where these things are primarily placed. And of course, everybody talks about the electrification, but also when you talk about the automation of things, which sits more in the industrial part, they need to go together, because if you focus on only one element, it's not sufficient. So you need to have both in mind. And that is also, from a European perspective, one of the areas where additionally Japan has said, well, we want to grow specifically in the overseas markets. And that's why we've received also a very strong focus from Japan on the European market, where we are now also trying, besides the manufacturing investment, try to also do some investments in the area of R&D.
And so just trying to picture the company's structure, because it's a Japanese company, and does that mean that the privatization of it is that being sort of like held in Japan with offices around the world?
It's actually held in Japan from a financial perspective, because that's how the Japan Investment Fund has been set up as an invested company, and people have paid into it. So there were investors that gave us the money to operate that kind of buyback of the shares. So it's kind of a Japanese interest, but the other thing which is very important, I think in the past, Toshiba was always seen like a company that plays primarily in the Japanese market. But when you want to grow, you have to basically bring your assets to the global market. And this is, I think, the most important thing that the company has said, well, in order to become a global player, we need to do all these kind of investments for manufacturing, but in order to execute the business in future, we have to tie up with the overseas market stronger than we did before. And that is basically the point where we have received as a European overseas company more attention than we ever had before.
So when I think of Toshiba, I always saw it as being a global company because I've got Toshiba equipment at home. I see it in the shops. I've seen it all over the world. So I'm quite surprised that the idea for the privatization was to help make it more global, despite the fact that I thought it already was. So I suppose my question then is, how is Toshiba viewing the global market differently, or how was it different compared to now than it was before the privatization?
Actually, it's an element of where you need to see is like, where do you need to grow from where you have a good market share and where you don't have a good market share. And that was a very simple consideration because we have quite a substantial market share in Japan. But when you grow, and you see, well, I cannot extend the market share so much in Japan, and you obviously need to look in the overseas markets. And that is what the conclusion was. Say, well, connected with the view of where is most of the innovation happening globally and who are the people that are driving this. And of course, Europe is one element which is a driving force in both the automotive as well as the industrial part of the market. And that was basically the background why those decisions were taken to also focus a bit more on Europe.
And so when you say, because one thing I'm trying to think of is, let's say industrial, for example. I can imagine a Japanese factory relying on Toshiba PLC controllers or motor controllers and power devices and stuff like that, and I can understand that. And then it sounds like what you're suggesting is that maybe in the West, that kind of equipment would have been less popular compared to other brands that would be out there. And so Toshiba wants to also go for those markets as well.
Well, of course, we still have strong ties with Japanese companies. We are not going to give that up. But I think the point is, just to reiterate, we definitely want to be closer to the European companies. And that is why we are also investing into that R&D part, because the very important thing is that we have access to the innovation in the European market. And that is one of the underlying elements of what we are strengthening, besides, of course, focusing. One very important thing is, and that is the alignment of our product portfolio versus the local market requirements. So it means we are having a very intensive discussion about how do we basically match the products for the future with the requirements of the customers in the European market.
And just to be clear, when we say R&D, in more of the Western nations, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the newer power technologies, like we said before, the silicon carbide, that sort of thing?
Well, there are different things. As I said, as we have different elements in our company, the new R&D part that was recently established is basically not only looking into power semiconductors, it's looking into the whole field of sustainability and circular economy. Quantum computing was already set as an R&D activity. So we are looking it from different angles. And I think when you look into how you can become more competitive, the understanding of what the application needs at a very early stage helps you to define the future outline of your power semiconductors, for example, or other devices. Because then you have got the view of the needs and basically in which direction you have to develop new technologies. Because the other very important part is it takes time to develop those, introduce them to the market, and it easily reaches like 5 to 7 years before a new fundamental technology arrives at a product that some of the end customers can buy. So it's really a life cycle consideration in making sure that you really do these steps early enough that you can arrive at the point of impact when it goes actually into a system.
So and this is the thing which I'm trying to reconcile in my mind, because we all know that Japan is probably one of the most advanced countries in the world. You know, I would argue far more advanced than like the States, for example. And so I find it hard to understand how a Japanese company like Toshiba would be dependent on outside nations for furthering its R&D. So it seems to imply to me that the R&D side, well, the growth, the entering the foreign markets is about trying to get new products on the market, so that then Toshiba can then develop their R&D to then put more products onto the market more rapidly. Is that right?
Yeah, it's actually, as you said, there's a lot of innovation and R&D happening in Japan. If you want to be a very strong global player, you have to play in the other markets as well. So it's not like that, as I said, you give up one place and you move yourself to another place. It's basically extending that scope, right? And that is basically the underlying activity that we go through right now.
And I suspect as well that going for new markets also opens up new opportunities, which also means that you can increase your revenue, thereby diverting more of that to your R&D.
Yes, absolutely. I think when we look at the market share that we have, then of course it tells a very clear story that we should be much more stronger, that we need to develop the market share, and that it has been seen by our company. So that is the driving force of the consideration behind all of those activities. I'm not saying it's only Europe. That's not the part, but we see that we need to definitely grow in the European market. It's quite an exciting time for us, because
that's what I find so strange. And that's what I find so strange, because it's weird to hear such a large company like Toshiba saying we need a bigger foothold in the European market, because I see Toshiba everywhere. So it's really quite strange to hear that Toshiba doesn't think that it's got a big enough market share yet, and that's quite impressive, that it's got that opinion of itself. Because I mean, like a lot of Japanese brands, the name Toshiba, it reliability, good quality, and so it's just quite unusual to hear that that the company almost feels like it needs to expand further. But like you say, by doing so, it can fund more for its R&D, thereby improving what it can provide to the market. But my question to you now is, of all the projects that Toshiba is currently looking into and actively investing into, what's the one that's got your interest peaked? What's the one you find the most interesting or most excited for?
Well, it's a connection of, let's say, the wide bandgap semiconductors, how they can actually improve the scope towards creating sustainable solutions, and also go across that point of net zero, which is often talked about. And that's why we generated that regenerative innovation center in Düsseldorf, which is, as I said, taking a view from the system side, and also try to cover the scope of various systems, plus also the device side. And that is really very exciting, because when you understand, when you're tuning new technologies, what are you shooting for? And obviously one of the goals in our company is shooting for performance. That is always the best thing to do. But also the other element is, when we talk about GaN, for example, SiC, I think it's getting mainstream step by step. It's kind of more mature than GaN. GaN, there are a lot of issues. Yeah. The people are trying to change the device outline, and also how to control these things. So from a technological aspect point of view, it's like how to control these things, and how do you maximize the performance and optimize the points for performance versus cost, is a really exciting thing, honestly speaking.
So, and that's something that we saw last time we went to Embedded World, where everyone is really trying to get into the whole power market, especially with SiC and GaN. And so I think it just kind of makes sense that now, even Toshiba's now looking, how can we use these technologies? So I take it this would include things, when you say like automotive, for example, that could be regenerative braking, that could be fast charging, it could be power putting back onto the grid. I take it those are the kind of technologies that Toshiba is interested in?
Yes, sure. I think, as I said, the electrification point covers so many topics. It's not only the car, for example, itself. It's the whole infrastructure that sits behind that. And also one of the important things that people forget to talk about when you talk about electrification, you need power, but how do you generate power in the future? And what are the entire aspects, and how do you manage that? Also staying sustainable, regenerative, and so on. And that is really opening up a very wide field of future activities, and of course the required innovation that sits behind that.
And do you think it would be fair to say that with all of these technologies coming out, with all of these opportunities, do you think the fact that there were so many choices, it sort of caused the previous shareholders to kind of get confused as to which direction they wanted to go, which is why no one could move anywhere?
Yeah, I think I have to say one thing, Toshiba was very widely set up. You know, we've been entertaining very many business fields from an entire company point of view, but also for the semiconductor side. We also went through some restructuring on the semiconductor side to basically elect a field of where we definitely want to focus and play in, because the sums of money that you have to invest in order to become or stay a global player is quite significant in these times. And that's why you definitely need to focus. You have to shrink your area of activity to a more suitable part. And I think that is one of the considerations that were taken in order to take these kind of steps.
And hence that's why there was the idea of maybe to make sort of little like umbrella corporations of Toshiba to try and make them more specific. But like you say, that involves its own challenges. And so by essentially eliminating the issue with the shareholders, now you've got the full freedom to do exactly what you need when you need to do it.
Yes, right, of course. And this is a very exciting time for us because it's like, you know, the privatization has just been set. I would say we are now September, it's 9 months ago. But of course there are a lot of initiatives inside our company to set everything into action, and that's the very exciting part of it.
I think the only downside to the privatization of Toshiba is now that people like me can't invest in it, because now with these new actions and these new decisions, it makes me think that Toshiba would be a great opportunity, a great investment. But of course, the problem is now you can't, because it's now privatized.
Yes, well, nobody knows what the future holds, whether we're going to be listed in the future again. But I think as always, you have to stay to your grounds right now. So we've got a strategy put in place, and we have to execute that right now. That's the most important thing. So maybe chances for future investment will come at some time in the future again.
Well, my fingers are definitely crossed for that. So just before we wrap up this podcast, I've got one more question for you. For the viewers who are watching this video, if they want to get involved with Toshiba solutions and want to know more about the privatization of Toshiba, what would you recommend that they do?
Well, of course, you can call us. That's the old conventional way of getting in touch with us. But we are present at the Electronica in November, so it means we have a booth. It's, I think, in hall C3, and the booth number is 190.
Are you going to be there personally?
Maybe. I will be there personally, so if someone wants to talk to me, so they can find me at the Electronica. And I think the other way is, of course, visit any of our social media profiles and our website, and that's where you can find tons of information. I think that will help you to understand what solutions we have.
Fantastic. Well, all I can say is thank you ever so much for taking the time to see us today.
Yeah, Robin, thanks you very much for the opportunity to talk to you, and hope we will have a chance to meet in the future, maybe in Munich at the Electronica, who knows.
I will be counting on it. Thank you ever so much.